Chapter 15, which is part of tab 7, which is on persuasion, is entitled Tools for Persuading. So first off, I want to make sure that we're clear about what persuasive speaking is and how it is different from informative speaking. So persuasive speaking is a deliberate attempt to create, reinforce, or change attitudes, beliefs, values, and or behaviors. So essentially, persuasive speaking is when you try to convince somebody else to do something, believe something, take part in something, when there's already an established belief, attitude, or behavior, you convince them to do something else. So first thing to note is the importance of knowing what should a persuasive speaker do. What is the purpose of a persuasive speech? So you want to make sure that you narrow the listener's options so they know what you are standing for and what the opposite of what you're standing for is. So what are you trying to persuade them to do instead of other things? Or what are you trying to persuade them to think or act or feel compared to other things? You want to appeal to a particular response, so you want to make sure that you have a directly stated thing about what you want them to do or what you want them to think. So this is one that's important because a lot of people will do persuasive speeches where they will provide all this fantastic evidence, but at the end of the speech, the audience is left confused because they're unsure about what they should do or what they can do about what you just shared. And then you want to support a proposition of fact, a proposition of value, or a proposition of policy. So you give a persuasive speech to prove that something is factual, to make a value judgment and to get them to agree that your judgment is accurate, or to prove a need for a different policy for something that's already in place. So the first thing, or the most common appeals people use to persuade, are pathos, ethos, and logos. This book also talks about mythos. So I'm going to start with mythos and then go on to these other ones. So mythos is the appeal to a sense of one's history in a larger culture and a need to be a member of that culture. So anytime you can give a speech that allows people to feel like if they follow what you have to say, they'll belong somewhere, or if they believe what you say or follow what you suggest, it will aid them in belonging to a group or continue to belong to a group. That is going to be very effective. Outside of mythos, the other three, pathos, ethos, and logos, are also called were invented by Aristotle and are Aristotle methods to persuasion. So pathos is an appeal to an emotion. That is when you tug on somebody's heartstrings. If you can use pathos, you are going to be able to suck the audience in and get them emotionally invested in what you have to say. That is incredibly effective. The kind of opposite of pathos is logos, so appeal to logic or reasoning. So that is when you use facts and statistics and proven things to support your thesis. Then the last one is ethos, which is the appeal to credibility. So that is when you establish your competency, your character, your charisma. You have to use all three of those, pathos, ethos, and logos, in order to be a successful persuasive speaker. Because if you don't appeal to their emotions, if you don't draw in your audience through the use of your emotions, they're not going to care about what you have to say. If you don't use logos, if you don't use credible statistics, credible facts, things along those lines, hard evidence to support your thesis, then people are going to be left wondering if you made this up or if this is something that has sound reasoning. And then ethos, appeal to credibility. If you aren't citing your sources where you got your facts and statistics from logos, if you aren't establishing that you do know enough about the subject to be talking about it, people aren't going to believe you. They aren't going to want to listen to you. They're going to think that you are misleading them. That's why establishing competency, establishing your character, establishing credible sources for your information, all of those things are incredibly important in order to make sure that you put forth a good persuasive speech. So you must make sure you use pathos, logos, and ethos. Without one, your persuasion will fall apart. The next thing are modern appeals used to persuade. So the first one, and I apologize, these things kind of overlapped a little bit, but it's Maslow's hierarchy of needs. So what that's talking about is, if you look over here, it talks about the different things that people need in order to be able to listen and be persuaded. So the first thing at the bottom here is talking about their physiological needs. So if a person doesn't know where they're going to sleep that night, if they don't know where their next meal is coming from, if they haven't had anything to drink in 2 days, things along those lines, all of your physiological needs, if those aren't met, that's where your entire attention is going to be, to survival. So you're not going to be open to a speech about why we should lower tuition costs if you're too busy figuring out where you're going to get your next meal. And then it moves up the pyramids. Then you have safety, which is if you don't feel safe. If you don't feel safe, you're not going to care about anything else. Your need for love and belonging, your need for self-esteem, and then finally when you get to self-actualization, that's where a person needs to be in order to be open to potential persuasive speeches. So that's just important of understanding with the audience that you're speaking to. If they are not at the self-actualization stage of the Maslow's hierarchy of needs, you're going to struggle a little bit more to maintain their attention. On the opposite side, modern appeal is Monroe's motivated sequence. I highly recommend, if you are nervous about figuring out how to give a good speech, how to give a good persuasive speech, to follow Monroe's motivated sequence. So the very first thing is the attention. You got to grab the audience attention. A lot of times that's where Athos will come in with a story or something, but that's also where your attention grabber is. Then your need, which is your thesis. Your need is what is not your thesis. I apologize. Your need is, what is the problem in the world? What is the problem you are giving your speech on? What is the issue at hand? The satisfaction is how you're going to meet that need. So your satisfaction that is your thesis. So your satisfaction is how to meet the need. Then visualization, that's where a lot of your supporting evidence is going to come from, a lot of your background, a lot of your citations, and that's where you're going to help them visualize how your thesis, so how your satisfaction is the best way to meet the need that is needing to be met. Then finally, action, which is where you let the audience know what they can do to help meet your solution to your need that is currently not being met. A few other modern appeals that can be used to persuade. So you can appeal to harmony, which means you avoid cognitive dissonance. So cognitive dissonance is the human need to be in a harmonious state. So what this is saying is, if you can give a speech that will tell the audience how we can restore harmony, how we can fix an injustice, things along those lines, that is going to help, that's going to draw the audience in, because the audience, people as human beings want peace. They want people to be happy. They want people to be in harmony. So if your speech talks about how we can achieve that, at least in a small area of our world, that will assist and be a very successful persuasive technique. Appeal to gain. So this is how the audience can get something. So if you are telling them how to save money so that way they can retire at 55, you are appealing to gain. You are appealing to help them realize what they can do to get something, to gain something. And that talks about the expectancy outcome values theory, which suggests that people will evaluate the cost, benefit, or value related to making a change and decide if it is worthwhile or not. So if you tell people, if you give me $100 now, in 10 years, I'll give you $105, that's the expectancy is not going to the outcome is not going to overshadow the cost of the initial transaction. But if you said, if you give me $100 now, in 2 years, I'll give you $1,000, that might mean that the expectancy outcome relationship, that theory, the values, that it might be worth the cost now to get the payoff in 2 years, so long as I explain how that's going to happen. Then lastly is the appeal to commitment, which essentially is just talking about how if the audience can feel like they're committed to something, that they're joining something, that they're a part of something, that's going to assist them in buying into whatever you are trying to convince them to do. So for the book's example is texting while driving should be illegal. If you can get them to commit to that idea that texting while driving should be illegal because you use good evidence, they feel like they are committing to a cause or committing to an organization, that's going to help the student or help the audience feel like they are a part of something, which is a very effective persuasive technique. Okay, so let's break it down. Parts of an argument. There are 3 main parts. You've got the claim, which is the solution to the argument, the solution to the need, the satisfaction. So if we are talking about how to take care of the ozone, so my claim is by investing in more solar power and less coal, we will lower the effect of carbon emissions into our ozone, which will reduce the ozone depletion. So that's my claim, that we need to look more into solar power. Then I would provide evidence, so my evidence is going to be all of the information that shows that solar power is better for the ozone and that coal power is worse for the ozone, and how the ozone is depleting and what that is how that is affecting us. So all of those different things are going to have tons of evidence to back it up. And then the last thing that you need is the warrant. So the warrant is what connects the evidence to the claim. So every time you share evidence, it needs to be related back to your claim, which is your thesis or your central idea. And so there are several different types of warrants out there that are going to make that connection between your evidence and your claim. So what type of argument should you use for writing your persuasive speech? There are 5 types. So you got argument by deduction. So if you're going that route, how you're going to craft the argument is you're going to start with your major premise. So what is the major thing that's wrong? Your minor premise, what are the little things we can do to fix the problem? And that's going to lead to the conclusion. Then you have argument by induction. So that's specific cases that lead to a claim. So that is the idea that if blueberries are blue and blueberries taste good and blue raspberries are blue and blue raspberries taste good and blue Gatorade is good or blue Gatorade is blue and that is good, then your claim would be anything that's blue tastes good. So it's specific case, specific case, specific case, because all of these things support your claim, support your central idea, then your central idea must be true. Then you have argument by analogy. So that's just when you can make an argument where you compare something to something else. That can sometimes be a strong argument. Argument by cause, which is the basic idea of cause and effect so the coal emissions are depleting the ozone. So this is causing that. Will become the argument. So that's an argument by cause. And then argument by authority, which is where you use testimony of others who have an authority in an issue to support your claim. So that's in a nutshell of the different tools you might use to write your persuasive speech. But like I said, if you're nervous about it, I highly recommend that you go through each part of this chapter and you figure out which argument, so argument by deduction or analogy, what method you're going to use, so Monroe's motivated sequence or cause and effect, and then most importantly that you figure out what your ethos, pathos, and logos are going to be. So that wraps up this chapter, and the next lecture will be on chapter 16, which is talking about how to go about writing your persuasive speech. So stay tuned for that.